March 5th, 1994. Arizona State University is locked in a fierce battle against the Washington Huskies. The clock is winding down, and every basket counts. On the court, one man is playing like his entire life depends on it. But what nobody knows is that the game is already decided.
Point-shaving scandals are the game's worst of crimes, but they do happen.
From a guy that never had anything, when you come from where we come from, man, who knows what you'll do?
I was the point guard. Point guard is the main player. He's the one bringing the ball up the court. Point guard is the quarterback, so I was in control.
Across the country, in the smoky back rooms of Las Vegas, millions of dollars are riding on this very moment. The bookies, they think they've got it all figured out. The gamblers, they believe they're just playing the odds. But the truth is far more sinister. Because on this court, the game isn't just basketball, it's deception. And the man holding the ball, he's not just playing for his team, he's playing for something much bigger. A secret so well hidden, it would take the FBI 3 years to uncover it. And when it all comes crashing down, it will cost some their freedom, others their careers. And for one promising star, it will cost him everything. This is the story of how one of the biggest betting scandals in college basketball history unfolded, how a rising star, a corrupt bookie, and a millionaire gambler pulled off one of the most brazen sports fixes ever, and how it all fell apart. This is how you destroy a future. Stephen Headache Smith grew up knowing one thing. Basketball was his way out. Out of the struggle, out of the streets, out of poverty. And if he worked hard enough, he could make it to the NBA. And he wasn't just good, he was one of the best. A point guard with the court vision of Magic Johnson and the scoring ability of Steph Curry. By his senior year, he was the top scorer in the Pacific 10 Conference. He was destined for greatness. He had it all. But there was one problem. In 1994, college athletes weren't getting paid. Schools made millions off their talent, while players like Smith lived on $130 a month. No endorsement deals, no sponsorships, no money for food, clothes, or anything. The system was broken. Smith was a superstar on the court, but off of it, he was struggling to survive. And that's when temptation walked through the door. Enter Benny Silman, the man who could get you anything. You wanted cash? He had it. A fake ID? No problem. Girls, booze, cars, whatever you needed, Silman knew how to make things happen. But his real business? Gambling. Silman ran the biggest underground betting operation on campus. And for guys like Smith, betting on sports was just harmless fun. At first, it was just pocket change. A few bets here and there. No harm, right? But there's a rule to gambling. The house always wins. And soon, Smith wasn't winning anymore. And thus, by January 1994, Smith was $10,000 in debt. And when you owe a bookmaker like Silman, you don't get to walk away. Silman had a solution. One that didn't involve broken bones or missing persons reports. One that, according to him, was easy money. Enter Joseph Gagliano, 22 years old, a former bond trader from Chicago. Smart, rich, and addicted to gambling. But unlike Smith, Gagliano didn't bet on luck. He bet on certainty. You don't have to lose, man. Just win by less. The plan? Simple. A concept called point shaving. The bookies set a margin, a point spread. Instead of losing the game, all Smith had to do was make sure ASU didn't win by too much. Just slow the game down, miss a shot or two, turn the ball over at the right time. No one would ever know. And for that, Smith would get $20,000 per game, more than he'd ever seen in his life. That was all it took. One nod, one handshake. And in that moment, Stephen Smith stopped playing basketball and started playing a much more dangerous game. In gambling, there's something called a point spread. The bookies predict how much a team will win by. If Arizona State was expected to win by 12, All Smith had to do was make sure they won by less. It was simple. The odds makers set the line. The gamblers bet against it. And Smith? He controlled the outcome. But he wasn't doing this alone. Smith needed backup. And who better than his best friend, Ice Burton, the best free throw shooter on the team. He wasn't even the star, just a role player. But if he missed a couple shots, no one would suspect a thing. The first fix was on January 27, 1994, Game 1, ASU versus Oregon State. The line, 12.5 points. Smith gets the call. You can win, but don't win by more than 6. The money is in motion. $500,000 placed across 30 different sports books. Small enough bets to avoid suspicion. Just under $10,000 per bet, the IRS threshold. This is the art of deception. The bets are spread out. No single bookie smells a rat. No red flags, no alarms. Just a clean operation. Or so they thought. Smith was too good, too dominant. If ASU won by more than 6, the entire operation would collapse. It had to look natural. A sloppy pass here, a lazy defensive play there. Oregon State fights back, but never enough to win. The commentators called it a sloppy performance, except for Smith. He dropped 39 points, his best game yet. And yet, no one suspected a thing. One game, one fix, over $1 million made. And for Smith, $20,000 in his pocket. But this was just the beginning. Few days later, Game 2. Oregon, same plan, same fix, same cash. But this time, the stakes were even higher. It was the Super Bowl weekend, a gambler's paradise. Billions of dollars flowing in and out of Vegas. A perfect time to hide a rigged college game in plain sight. This was a problem. The line was 12.5. ASU was blowing them out. Smith needed to fix this, fast. This was not part of the plan. Smith was out, and with him, the fix was in jeopardy. Gagliano in Vegas, he's sweating, pacing. If ASU covers the spread, millions are lost. But then, something insane happens. Smith limping back onto the court, his ankle taped. He can barely run, but he's back in the game. Smith had no choice. He could barely walk, but he had to control the game. He had to shave points. And fortunately, the final scoreboard was 84-78, a 6-point win. Another perfect fix for Gagliano, cashing out $2.5 million. For Smith, the money was real. The power was intoxicating. He wasn't a college kid anymore. He was a businessman, a gambler, a fixer. But if there's one rule in gambling, it's that the house always wins. And soon, the walls would start closing in. By February 1994, Stephen Smith had everything. The money was flowing, the games were fixed, and as far as he was concerned, no one suspected a thing. But here's the thing about greed. It makes you sloppy, it makes you arrogant, and worst of all, it makes you think you're invincible. The first mistake? The money. It was too much, too fast. In the span of a month, Gagliano and his crew had placed millions of dollars in bets. Dozens of bets, each just under $10,000 placed on ASU games. And the bookies were starting to notice. A betting line normally shifts a few points before a game. But ASU, their lines were moving 10, 20, even 40 times in a single night. Someone was betting big. Too big. Vegas doesn't like losing money, and when things don't add up, the house starts asking questions. And then comes the game that changed everything. ASU versus UCLA. Smith should have stopped. He had hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash. But greed? Greed makes you want more. And this time, he wasn't just fixing games. He was betting on himself. The plan was different this time. The line was set at 4 points. ASU wasn't the favorite. UCLA was. So instead of shaving points, Smith just needed to make sure ASU covered the spread. The game starts. ASU and UCLA go back and forth. It's a tight battle. Then, in the final seconds, disaster. The scoreboard flashes. UCLA 76, ASU 70. Smith looks up in shock. He lost the bet. Smith had bet on his own team, and he lost. But here's the problem. He didn't lose his money. It was Gagliano's. And when you lose a gambler's money, there are consequences. Smith was in debt again, and there was only one way out: fix another game. This time betting against USC. But this time, the operation was getting sloppy. Word was getting around. Students were whispering, and the secret was no longer a secret. On campus, students wearing ASU jerseys were betting $20 bills, acting like they already knew the final score. The bookies watch in disbelief as the line shifts from 11 points to 6. One of them picks up a phone. And this was the final red flag. A 44-point line shift, the largest in Vegas history. The bookies had seen enough. It was time to make a call to the Nevada Gaming Commission, and afterward, Vegas had just tipped off the FBI. Coach Bill Frieder reunited with the players and told them that he just got a call from the FBI and that they're investigating this game. If anyone knows anything, now's the time to speak up. For the first time, Smith realized this wasn't a game anymore. This was federal. The feds were connecting the dots, the strange betting patterns, the phone calls, the sudden influx of cash, and they had one name at the center of it all: Stephen Smith. The FBI had the evidence. They just needed the right moment to strike. And when they did, it would be game over. For months, the FBI had been watching, tracking phone records, following the money. And now, they had everything they needed. It was time to move. At Arizona State, practice was in full swing when the gym doors swung open. A group of men in suits walked in. Without hesitation, they made their way towards Smith. The air felt thick. One of the agents pulled out a badge. "Stephen Smith, we need to talk." Everything that had seemed so certain just days before, the money, the invincibility, the illusion of control, vanished in an instant. As he was led out of the gym, his teammates stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. Meanwhile, in Vegas, Joseph Gagliano was already under surveillance. The FBI raided his home, turning up stacks of cash, betting records, and undeniable proof that linked him to the operation. Benny Silman was picked up next, taken into custody with little resistance. He had known this day was coming. He always knew how these stories ended. The evidence was overwhelming. Over $8.7 million in bets traced back to fixed games. Phone records confirmed calls between Smith and the key figures behind the operation. Casino surveillance footage showed the same faces placing identical bets across multiple sportsbooks. It was airtight. The feds had their case. By December 1997, the hammer dropped. A grand jury handed down a 72-count federal indictment. The charges were severe: sports bribery, racketeering, and money laundering. When Smith stood in court, he barely recognized himself. The headlines had painted him as the mastermind, the one who had corrupted the game. The judge delivered his sentence: 1 year and 1 day in federal prison, along with $8,000 in restitution. It was less than he had feared, but more than he could bear. He had always imagined himself in front of cameras, but not like this. Gagliano, the man who had orchestrated the betting operation, received 15 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay $28,000 in restitution. Silman, the bookie who had introduced Smith to the underworld of gambling, got the harshest sentence: 46 months behind bars. Even Isaac "Ice" Burton, who had played a minor role in the scandal, couldn't escape the fallout. He was sentenced to 6 months in a halfway house, 3 years probation. For Smith, prison wasn't the real punishment. The real punishment was waking up every day knowing that he could have been in the NBA, knowing that he had been on the verge of something great before he threw it all away. The game had moved on, and all Smith could do was live with the weight of what he had lost.